You have heard of Dracula, the vampire, the monster, the myth. But what if the real story is far more terrifying? What if the man behind the legend was not a creature of the night, but a blood-soaked prince who ruled through fear, torture, and impalement? This is the true story of Vlad the Impaler, a ruler so brutal that even empires feared him, a man whose real-life cruelty makes fiction look tame. Watch closely, because what you are about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about Dracula. Vlad III, later known as Vlad the Impaler, was born in the year 1431 in the fortified town of Sighet, located in the historical region of Transylvania, present-day Romania. His birth took place during one of the most turbulent periods in Eastern European history. The Balkans were constantly ravaged by political instability, bloody power struggles, and the relentless advance of the Ottoman Empire from the south. Into this violent and unstable world, Vlad III was born as the second legitimate son of Vlad I Dracul, a member of the chivalric Order of the Dragon, a society founded to defend Christianity against the Ottoman Turks. The very name, Dracul, comes from the Latin word Draco, meaning dragon. As a result, Vlad III became known as Dracula, which literally translates to son of the dragon. Over time, the Romanian interpretation of Dracul shifted from dragon to devil, adding an even darker shade to his legacy. This simple but symbolic name would one day become famous across the world, both in historical records and in fictional tales of terror. Vlad's childhood was anything but peaceful. At the age of 11 or 12, he and his younger brother Radu were sent as political hostages to the court of the Ottoman Sultan Murad I. This was not an act of kindness, but rather a brutal method of ensuring Vlad Tebe, Dracul's loyalty to the Ottomans. The two boys were imprisoned in the Ottoman court, and their treatment, although not openly torturous, was psychologically harrowing. Vlad was exposed to the military discipline and Islamic teachings of the Ottoman Empire, while at the same time harboring deep resentment for being held against his will. It is believed that during this time, young Vlad developed a hardened and suspicious nature, along with a taste for brutality that would one day define his rule. While his brother Radu assimilated into Ottoman life and even became a favorite of the Sultan, Vlad's hatred for his captors only grew stronger. The contrasting paths of the two brothers, one bending to the empire and the other resisting it with vicious fury, would later shape the deadly rivalries that emerged in Wallachia. Vlad's return to his homeland would not be marked by celebration, but by more betrayal and bloodshed. In 1447, his father Vlad II Dracul and his elder brother Mircea were assassinated by rival boyars, the powerful aristocrats of Wallachia, who resented their rule and Ottoman alliances. Vlad III, now a teenager with a vendetta, escaped execution and began plotting his rise to power. His motivations were not only political, but deeply personal. He had witnessed his family torn apart by treachery, had tasted betrayal by his own people, and had survived years of humiliating captivity. This cocktail of rage, trauma, and ambition created a man who would stop at nothing to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. In 1448, with Ottoman backing, Vlad briefly seized the throne of Wallachia for the first time. However, his reign lasted only a few months before he was ousted by a rival faction. These early years of instability, betrayal, and repeated attempts to regain power shaped Vlad into a ruler who would place no trust in anyone. For him, loyalty was either absolute or punishable by death. His belief in ruling through fear was not merely a political strategy. It was the only way he knew how to survive in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. Vlad's transformation into Epic, or the Impaler, was not sudden, but it was inevitable. The seeds of brutality were planted in his childhood and watered by the violence of his surroundings. In the following years, as he solidified his rule and prepared for vengeance against his enemies, both foreign and domestic, his name would become synonymous with terror across Europe. His enemies would tremble, his people would obey, and his legacy would echo through time as both a national hero and a monster cloaked in blood. Vlad's full emergence as the ruler of Wallachia did not happen overnight. After his brief and unstable first reign in 1448, he spent years in exile, plotting his return. The region was a volatile chessboard of power, where alliances shifted with the winds and death awaited any sign of weakness. By 1456, Vlad made a forceful comeback, this time with Hungarian support and a vengeance that had been festering for nearly a decade. He overthrew the sitting ruler, Vladislav II, and claimed the throne with iron resolve. This time, he was not going to let it slip through his fingers. Once in power, Vlad began his infamous campaign to reshape Wallachia through terror and absolute control. His first targets were not the Ottomans, but the Wallachian boyars, the very nobles who had betrayed his father and brother. Vlad believed that the aristocracy had grown corrupt, disloyal, and far too powerful. He was determined to dismantle their influence. His methods were swift and unsparing. On Easter Sunday of 1457, Vlad invited hundreds of boyars and their families to a grand feast in his court at Tr. The atmosphere was festive, and the guests expected a display of generosity and goodwill. Instead, Vlad turned the event into an orchestrated bloodbath. After accusing the boyars of disloyalty and conspiring against his family, he ordered his guards to seize them. The elderly were impaled on the spot. The younger and able-bodied were forced to march on foot to the ruins of Poenari Castle in the Carpathian Mountains. There, under brutal conditions, they were made to rebuild the fortress stone by stone. Few survived the ordeal. With that single act, Vlad both avenged his family and sent a chilling message: betrayal would be answered with annihilation. This was just the beginning. Over the next 6 years, Vlad ruled Wallachia with ruthless efficiency. He established law and order in a land plagued by crime, corruption, and feudal disorder. But he did it through fear, not through diplomacy. His preferred method of punishment was impalement, an excruciating execution in which a wooden stake was driven through the victim's body, often leaving them alive for hours or even days. The corpses were then displayed along roads, in town squares, and near fortresses as warnings to all who might consider defying the prince. It was a horrifying spectacle, but it was also deliberate psychological warfare. According to some chroniclers, Vlad impaled over 20,000 people during his reign. These included criminals, rival nobles, disloyal soldiers, foreign spies, and even peasants who broke curfew or refused to pay taxes. One legend tells of a golden cup left unguarded at a public well in Tr. So afraid were the people of Vlad's wrath that no one dared to steal it. Whether or not the story is true, it reflects the level of fear he instilled in his population. Vlad's campaign of terror was not limited to his own people. He turned his fury toward the Ottoman Empire, launching raids and guerrilla attacks into their territory. He refused to pay tribute, beheaded Ottoman envoys who disrespected him, and sent mocking messages to the Sultan. In one daring move, he disguised his soldiers as Turks and infiltrated an Ottoman camp at night, killing thousands and setting fire to their tents. When Sultan Mehmed Ay, conqueror of Constantinople, invaded Wallachia with a massive army to crush Vlad, he was met with a landscape of burned villages and rotting corpses on stakes. The most infamous moment came when Mehmed entered Govati and saw a forest of impaled bodies. Some accounts say over 20,000 victims. The horror was so overwhelming that the Sultan turned back, refusing to risk further confrontation. Yet, despite his victories, Vlad's power began to wane. His cruelty, while effective, had alienated potential allies and stirred unrest. The Ottomans, while temporarily repelled, remained an ever-present threat. His own brother Radu, now loyal to the Ottomans, was installed as a rival ruler in Wallachia. Internal rebellion, foreign invasion, and political betrayal once again closed in on Vlad. In 1462, he was forced to flee and was captured by Hungarian forces under King Matthias Corvinus. For the next 12 years, Vlad was held as a prisoner. Yet, even in captivity, his reputation as a fearsome ruler continued to grow. He was eventually released and allowed to mount one final attempt to reclaim his throne in 1476. This brief last reign, however, was short-lived. Vlad died in battle later that year. Some say he was killed by his own men, while others claim he was assassinated by the Ottomans. His head was reportedly sent to Constantinople as a gift to the Sultan, mounted on a stake as a grim trophy. The name, Dracula, stirs a very specific image in the minds of people across the world. An immortal vampire cloaked in darkness, sleeping in a coffin by day and feeding on blood by night. He is a creature of Gothic horror, a predator lurking in castles, haunting villages, and seducing mortals with cold, hypnotic eyes. However, long before Bram Stoker's famous novel introduced Count Dracula to the world, there was another Dracula, one made of flesh and blood, whose true story is even more terrifying than the fictional vampire he inspired. The connection between Vlad III and the Dracula myth begins with a name. Vlad was the son of Vlad II Dracul, a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secretive chivalric society founded to defend Christianity against the Ottoman Turks. In medieval Romanian, the word Dracul meant the dragon, and Dracula simply meant son of the dragon. Over time, due to linguistic shifts and the association of dragons with evil in Christian lore, Dracul also came to mean the devil in the Romanian language. Therefore, Dracula could be translated not only as son of the dragon, but also as son of the devil, a dual meaning that would later add to Vlad's sinister legacy. Bram Stoker, the Irish author who published Dracula in 1897, likely chose the name after reading about Vlad Author in historical texts. It is believed that he encountered references to Dracula while researching Eastern European legends, and was drawn to the name due to its exotic and menacing tone. Stoker never visited Romania, but he built his vampire tale around fragments of historical accounts and the mythology that had begun to swirl around Vlad's memory. His fictional Count Dracula lives in a Transylvanian castle, has supernatural powers, and preys on the living. Though loosely inspired by Vlad, the character is a fantastical creation rather than a direct reflection of the historical figure. However, the myth and the man are more deeply entwined than most realize. Stoker's Dracula is a symbol of eternal dread, a being who thrives on fear and domination. Vlad the Impaler ruled in a way that achieved exactly that. He used horror as a political weapon, creating real-life nightmares to subdue enemies and enforce loyalty. While Stoker's Count Dracula drinks the blood of his victims to sustain his life, Vlad metaphorically fed on the fear he created. his impalement tactics, mass executions, and terrifying displays of cruelty had a psychological impact that reached far beyond the borders of Wallachia. These events laid the groundwork for the transformation of Vlad into a monstrous legend. Stories about Vlad's brutality circulated widely across Europe, especially in German and Russian territories. These accounts, often printed in woodcut pamphlets during the early days of the printing press, depicted Vlad as a sadistic tyrant who delighted in murder and torture. One German pamphlet from the 1400s claimed that Vlad once dined among a circle of impaled victims, calmly dipping his bread into their blood. Another claimed that he executed thousands just to reduce the poor population. These stories, while exaggerated, were rooted in real events and helped shape Vlad's legacy into something mythical. In Western Europe, he became a symbol of Eastern savagery, the perfect villain for Christian audiences. It is important to note that in Romania, especially in modern times, Vlad is not universally seen as a villain. While his methods were brutal, many Romanians view him as a national hero who fought fiercely against Ottoman expansion and sought justice in a lawless age. They argue that his cruelty was calculated, not random, that he punished the corrupt and protected the innocent by instilling fear in the wicked. In this context, the idea of Vlad as a vampire becomes less relevant than his real historical role as a defender of his land. Despite the historical complexities, the myth of Dracula eventually overshadowed the truth. With the publication of Stoker's novel, Vlad the Impaler was reborn as Count Dracula, an immortal villain of Gothic fiction. The novel was followed by stage plays, films, and television series, each retelling the story in new and terrifying ways. From Bela Lugosi's iconic portrayal in the 1931 film to countless modern adaptations, Dracula became a cultural icon, a symbol of eternal darkness and forbidden desire. And yet, at the root of all of it lies the real man, Vlad III of Wallachia, a ruler forged in war, betrayal, and vengeance. He was not a creature of the night, but he did fill his world with darkness. He drank no blood, but he spilled oceans of it. He did not live forever, but his legend most certainly has. Of all the horrors associated with Vlad the Impaler, none has captured the imagination and terror of historians and storytellers, quite like the infamous Forest of the Impaled. It is a phrase that echoes like a nightmare through the corridors of European history, and it speaks to a very deliberate and calculated form of psychological warfare. Vlad III was not only a brutal executioner, he was a master of fear. He understood, perhaps better than any ruler of his time, that power was not only enforced by the sword, it was magnified through spectacle. The most haunting and well-documented example of this took place in the year 1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the same Ottoman leader who had conquered Constantinople in 1453, led a massive army northward to crush Vlad once and for all. Vlad had defied the Ottoman Empire by refusing to pay tribute, launching surprise attacks on Ottoman territory, and humiliating envoys. The Sultan, enraged and determined, brought with him a force that dwarfed anything Wallachia had ever faced. It was not just an invasion. It was intended to be a final conquest. But Vlad, knowing he could not defeat such a force head-on, turned to his most trusted weapon, fear. As the Ottoman army marched deeper into Wallachia, they encountered not armies, but scorched villages, poisoned wells and corpses. Vlad had ordered a scorched earth policy, burning towns and crops to starve the invaders. Any resources that could sustain an army were destroyed. What little remained was turned into a message written in blood. Then came the moment that cemented Vlad's place in the annals of terror. As Mehmed and his troops approached the capital city of Tia, Rogoviti, they were met with a sight so horrifying that even the hardened warriors of the Ottoman elite were shaken. Stretched across the battlefield, impaled on towering wooden stakes, were the rotting bodies of over 20,000 men, women, and children. Some were Ottoman prisoners of war. Others were Wallachian traitors. Many were simply victims, chosen to fill out the ghastly display. The stakes stretched as far as the eye could see, a grotesque forest of the dead. The scene was carefully arranged, symmetrical and ordered like a battlefield cemetery, but inverted in meaning. This was not a monument to the fallen. It was a living warning to the living. Contemporary accounts vary in their exact details, but the psychological impact was undeniable. Even Sultan Mehmed, a man known for his own cruelty and strategic brilliance, is said to have been deeply disturbed by the display. Some chronicles claim he turned back immediately. Others say he pushed forward briefly, but soon retreated, realizing that even if he won the battle, the cost would be far too great. Whether these details are exaggerated or not, they reveal something essential about Vlad. He did not need to win every fight. He only needed his enemies to believe that victory came at a price too high to pay. The impalement forest was more than just mass execution. It was theater. It was terror used as a weapon to wage psychological warfare. Vlad understood that fear could slow an army, demoralize a population, and fracture political alliances. He weaponized horror with the precision of a military strategist. Each impaled corpse was not just a body. It was a signal, a warning, a message carved into the land itself. This was not the only instance of Vlad using impalement in such a calculated way. Throughout his reign, towns were lined with stakes bearing the mutilated bodies of criminals, rebels, and spies. Foreign ambassadors who disrespected his court were sometimes executed in grotesque fashion, their fates meant to be retold in distant lands. He punished thieves and beggars with such severity that travelers in his domain claimed they could leave gold in the street without fear of theft. It was not justice in the modern sense. It was not law. It was fear, total and absolute, used to craft a world where order reigned, only because chaos had been crucified in front of everyone's eyes. Impalement itself was a particularly cruel method of execution. Victims were usually stripped naked, and a sharp or rounded wooden stake was inserted into the body, often through the rectum or the abdomen. The stake would be raised vertically, with the victim impaled alive and left to die slowly, sometimes over hours, even days. The stake was sometimes intentionally blunted, so as not to puncture vital organs too quickly. This ensured that the suffering would be prolonged, and that the display would last longer as a warning. Even centuries later, the memory of these atrocities continues to chill the bones of those who study them. But for Vlad, they were not just acts of cruelty. They were policy. They were power. In his mind, he ruled not by the will of the people or by divine right, but by the total surrender of fear, and for a time, that fear worked. Wallachia was under his rule, one of the most orderly and secure territories in all of Europe, precisely because it was one of the most terrifying. The legacy of Vlad the Dracula, known across the world as Vlad the Impaler, remains one of the most complex and controversial in European history. To some, he is a symbol of ultimate cruelty, a tyrant who ruled through bloodshed and psychological terror. To others, he is a national hero, a fearless defender of his homeland who refused to bow to foreign powers. The tension between these two interpretations, monster or savior, villain or patriot, lies at the heart of Romania's relationship with one of its most iconic historical figures. In Western Europe, Vlad's reputation was shaped largely by the pamphlets and woodcut prints circulated during his lifetime and shortly after. These publications, many originating in Germany and written by political enemies or rival kingdoms, painted him as a demonic sadist who delighted in torture and mass execution. In an age where the printing press was beginning to influence public opinion, these stories spread like wildfire. They were lurid, violent, and unforgettable, and they laid the foundation for the Dracula myth that would flourish centuries later. To Western audiences, Vlad became a cautionary tale of Eastern brutality and unchecked power. But within Romania, and especially in the region of Wallachia, a different narrative took root. Here, Vlad was remembered not as a vampire, but as a strict, incorruptible ruler who sought justice and national stability at any cost. In Romanian folklore and nationalist literature, he is often portrayed as a leader who protected the poor from exploitation, punished the corrupt aristocracy, and refused to surrender to the rising power of the Ottoman Empire. His iron-fisted methods were brutal, but they were also seen as necessary in a time of lawlessness, betrayal, and foreign invasion. This more favorable image of Vlad gained significant momentum in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly during the rise of Romanian nationalism. As the Romanian people sought to establish a cohesive national identity, they looked to powerful historical figures who had resisted foreign domination and fought for sovereignty. Vlad fit this mold perfectly. He was recast as a warrior, prince who stood his ground against the mighty Ottoman Empire, a symbol of strength and resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. His reputation was rehabilitated not only by historians but also by poets, writers, and politicians. Even today, you can find statues of Vlad in Romanian towns. His name appears on roads, parks, and even hotels. His face is printed on coins and stamps. The ruins of Poenari Castle, which he rebuilt and used as one of his strongholds, have become a popular historical site for both locals and tourists. And in the heart of Transylvania, the town of Sighet Ora, where he was born, proudly preserves the house where, according to tradition, the real Dracula took his first breath. At the same time, Romania has had to wrestle with the global image of Vlad that was exported through Bram Stoker's novel and the endless parade of vampire films, books, and pop culture references that followed. The Dracula of fiction, pale, undead, and seductive, bears only a faint resemblance to the war-hardened Prince of Wallachia. For many Romanians, the association is both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, it has brought international attention and tourism. On the other, it has overshadowed the historical truth with a fantasy that distorts their national story. The debate over Vlad's legacy continues in academic circles as well. Some historians argue that the number of people he killed, often cited as over 20,000, may have been exaggerated by his enemies. They note that he ruled in a time when executions, mutilations, and public torture were not uncommon, even in Western Europe. Others maintain that even if the numbers are inflated, the brutality of his methods is undeniable. What cannot be disputed is the impact he had, not only on the history of Romania, but on the collective imagination of the entire world. To fully understand Vlad the Impaler, one must set aside the Hollywood vampire and examine the real man, a prince born into a brutal world, shaped by betrayal and captivity, and driven by a relentless vision of order and vengeance. His story is not one of good versus evil. It is a story of survival, power, and legacy. A legacy still written in stone and legend throughout the hills of Romania. Vlad the Impaler was not a myth. He was not a vampire. He was a real man, shaped by war, forged in captivity, and consumed by a desire for vengeance and absolute control. In his lifetime, he ruled with an iron will and a sharpened stake, carving his authority into the land through brutality that defied imagination. His methods were horrifying, but they were also deliberate. To his enemies, he was a nightmare. To his supporters, he was a protector. He did not seek popularity. He sought obedience. He did not negotiate peace. He imposed fear. And through fear, he brought order to chaos. Across centuries, his legacy has twisted and turned, pulled between truth and legend. In the West, he became the seed of a monster, Count Dracula, the immortal predator of fiction. In his homeland, he remains a symbol of strength and national pride, a prince who refused to bow to foreign empires and who punished betrayal with fire and blood. His story is a mirror, reflecting whatever the world wants to see, be it terror or triumph, evil or endurance. To truly understand Vlad the Impaler is to look beyond the tales and face the reality of his time. He was a man of his era, but he was also ahead of it, a ruler who understood that fear travels faster than armies, and that memory can be more powerful than monuments. Long after his body turned to dust, his name endures, not only in history books but in nightmares. And perhaps that is his most lasting victory. Not the throne, not the battles, not even the terror, but the legacy that refuses to die.